We are. Can you confirm when recording started, Jane? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session of our East Suffolk Community Partnership Annual Forum. So today we're talking about transport, and this morning's session specifically is about connecting our rural community. So welcome all. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers today who I'll introduce shortly. My name's John. I'm a director at East Suffolk Council. Before we get into the meat of the meeting, I better just lay out some housekeeping rules. The first of which is, can you kindly mute your microphones? I can hear some background noise. So that's should see a little button with the mic on the top right. If you're not familiar with Teams, if you could just press that button to mute, and then that will make the meeting that much better. Also, you may have seen some images flick up if you joined slightly early, with some meeting etiquette. If you can use your raise your hand function if you want to ask a comment at any point. Although I should say that when our speakers are speaking, we're not going to invite questions during the actual presentations because that can sometimes slow the whole thing down. If you can save those questions or comments until after they've spoken, we'll then give you ample opportunity to ask those questions and make some comments. So if you could do that, that'd be much appreciated. There is a meeting chat bar on the side, and some of you would have seen that already. Just be aware this is being recorded, so it's not a private chat. So please don't make any sort of dodgy comments to each other in that chat bar. Obviously, you can raise specific points if you wish to, though. We're going to keep it fairly strict with time because we've got an hour and a half this morning. We've got lots to get through. We've got a number of speakers, but we also want to give yourselves ample opportunity to discuss, raise questions, because I think that's the most important bit of these sessions is hearing from yourself. So we've put aside a good amount of time for that to happen. So I'll be fairly strict on time. I'll politely indicate to speakers that their time's running out, so don't take offence, speakers, in advance. Okay, so with that housekeeping in mind, I'd just like to give everyone a bit of context to this morning's session. Transport is obviously a hugely important subject to us in East Suffolk and to yourselves in our communities. A rural area. Can somebody please? I can hear some background noise. If you can all mute your mics, please. I'm not sure who that is. I can hear rustling in the background. Someone, if you just check your mics are muted, that would be appreciated. Sorry, just going back to context. So yeah, transport's hugely important. East Suffolk Council obviously wants to promote good transport in our areas. We do have some challenges, and that's what's going to be the meat of today's discussions and presentations. We want to do our bit to help improve transport in our areas, whether urban, rural, because it's hugely important for us. We set up these community partnerships last year. This was a result of East Suffolk Council being born. Previously, we were 2 district councils. We merged into 1 from April last year. And as part of that, we created these community partnerships. 8 of them, for those of you that aren't aware, 8 community partnerships spread across our district. We're a big district. I think the 11th biggest in the country. Which presents its own challenges. Transport-wise, we've got the biggest population as a district in the country now after our merger. We set up these 8 partnerships to really do more community work, engage with our communities better, and hopefully deliver some good things locally. But before being able to do so, we went to those 8 areas. We hosted a number of forums. Hopefully many of you attended those. We looked at and presented data and information to those forums in terms of data on a place, what's happening in those areas, what are the issues, and had some really good discussions around that. But more importantly, we really wanted to hear from those local people and representatives that attended those sessions to ask them, what were the issues they were facing in their areas, what was important to them, what did they want to achieve and make a difference with. We collected all that information. We had some interesting sessions, and that culminated in some priorities. And basically, those priorities are the subject matter of this week's annual forum. And today is an example of that. The transport priority was a huge one amongst the 8 partnerships. Many of them voted transport as their top priority or the second highest priority. Which is great, which is what we're discussing today. That really centered around active travel, sustainable travel, and community transport. They were the main themes of those priorities. So the community partnerships have some funding. Each partnership gets £25,000 a year. There's a partnership board, which is an overarching board that gets £300,000 a year, and hopefully we will fund, and we're starting to fund many highly useful projects in hopefully many areas such as transport, which are developing at the moment, so we can actually deliver some real change on the ground. And today is all about that. We want to hear from some speakers as to what transport issues are we facing in our area, what are the opportunities around transport in our area, and most importantly, giving yourselves some time to tell us what you really want to achieve locally. What are the issues? What are the opportunities? We have some brilliant speakers today from a variety of backgrounds who I'll introduce shortly, but this is our opportunity to get that message to them so that we work together in unison to deliver to deliver change in our areas, which is possible. We work together from grassroots level, us in the communities, with our county colleagues, with our regional partners such as Transport East, who we'll be hearing from today. We've got a real opportunity to deliver change, but it happens where we bond together and do things together in forums like this. So with that in mind, I'm going to begin the session. I'm not sure if our colleague Alexander Nicol has joined us yet. I don't believe he has. I do see Graham Newman indicating. Graham, would you like to come in if you've got a urgent question?
Yeah, I just wondered if we've got any actual transport providers in the house, i.e. either our local community transport providers or indeed our big companies like First or Go Ahead or whatever, like that.
Somebody else, Debbie, were you indicating there? You're on mute, Debbie. Debbie, you're on mute. Easy mistake for me.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, thank you.
Okay, yes, back to community transport, so covering the Waveney area of East Suffolk.
Fantastic, thank you, Debbie. Anyone else in response to Graham? So Graham, we don't have transport providers here today to answer your question, but obviously we are joined by some highly influential colleagues who can get the message over and coordinate things, amongst our provider colleagues. So today is really to generate those ideas and issues and opportunities, so we can coalesce around those. I saw Alexander Nicol's hand come up.
Just to, I mean, we need to get started because we're all time bound, but just to Graham's point, I mean, obviously the presentation that Sue and Kirsty are giving later this morning, it will, without stealing their thunder, talk about a partnership involving another entity, and obviously also indicates that the County Council sees itself as having responsibility to try and address these issues, which is why that presentation is being brought forward, but I don't want to say anything else about it. The only other thing to say is that while transport may be problematic, IT is even more problematic, and I'm on my own personal iPad without my LGA backdrop, so you're all missing out on that, and my county computer is dead, so I'll be dealing with that later. But anyway, back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Alexander. I'm going to have to move things on. Let me just see. I can see a couple of questions. We'll take those just in case there's anything urgent, and then we'll make up time hopefully in the other elements. Councillor Bevan, David Bevan, did you have a hand? That's so early.
Just to say that I've set up a company for on-demand transport, Section 22 license applied for, so this is something in the future.
Thanks, David. That's helpful. And Sally Longmate, please.
Yeah, good morning, Nick. Just to say that the National Association of Local Councils a few months ago did a publication called The Good Councillor's Guide to Transport Planning. I'm just maybe flagging up there might be an opportunity to have a look at some of the pointers in there. I'm sure they're all covered because it's a general publication, but just flagging that up really. I'd quite like to make those types of things living documents for local councillors.
Thank you, Sally. That's helpful. And Nick Cork. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Nick. Just to say that obviously we are here in Framlingham, and obviously we've got experience of the last 4 or 5 years doing community transport to hospitals, doctors, and all that sort of thing. So we're more than happy to help where we can.
Fantastic. So Graham posed that question. We got some solid answers there. Thank you. We've got one other hand here from. Sorry, I can't see the name on my screen. I've got a DS. If you can come in.
Yeah, that's me, Danny Steele. One of my many hats. I'm on the committee of the Lowestoft and Yarmouth Rugby Club, and when we do provide a volunteer service minibus for two or three of the northern parishes here at Lowestoft.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. And once you've raised your hand, if you can put your hand down again. I'm getting away from Alexander. Alexander, would you like to come back in?
No, I'm just waiting to be called.
Right, brilliant. Thank you. Right, let's move on without further ado. So, Alexander, you're going to introduce yourself. I'll let you do that, and your what you want to outline. Thank you.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here, and I nearly wasn't, but anyway, I'm glad to be here. I'm the Deputy Cabinet Member for Transport at Suffolk County Council, and I'm also privileged to currently serve as Chair of the Local Government Association Public Transport Consortium, about which I will say a few words in a minute. Andrew Summers will shortly go into detail about the role and aspirations of Transport East, which works closely with local authorities and other relevant stakeholders in our region. Later, officers from the transport team at Suffolk County Council will give a detailed presentation about an innovative EV taxi bus pilot, with which I have been closely involved, and which, despite COVID, could provide practical pointers towards the key goals of decarbonising our public transport network and building better transport links between especially rural communities. The Public Transport Consortium is a special interest group of the Local Government Association and represents county and unitary authorities in England and Wales. It is a forum for discussion of public transport issues and developments, and promotes exchange of information and advice to local authorities. Local authorities are represented by elected members and officers. A weekly newsletter keeps members appraised of transport developments, research reports produced by pressure groups and consultants. Usually 6 meetings are held each year, to which all members are invited, and there is a presentation and discussion session on a topic of national interest. One meeting each year is a study tour and goes to see transport developments in a particular location. The consortium has regular dialogue with the Department for Transport, Network Rail, and bus and train operators. Since March, meetings have continued, but virtually, and sadly we had to cancel the 2020 study tour, which was coincidentally going to come to Suffolk, but hopefully merely a postponement. 2020 started optimistically, seems a long time ago, with the prospect of significant government investment in transport projects. But the pandemic, with a message not to travel, reduced use of public transport, typically by up to 95% in some areas. Despite the fact that public transport is made safe to use, recovery has been slow, typically no more than 50% of pre-COVID levels, and the further, in my view, very necessary second lockdown will impact public transport and slow down the return of passengers. Rail and bus services are in large part, and certainly now, dependent upon public funding, and social distancing reduces capacity. It is anticipated that as new ways of working, commuting or no commuting, and shopping are found, a full return of passenger journeys to pre-COVID levels is possibly unlikely. Beyond this, reform of the rail franchising system is expected. Winning passengers back is a challenge, but the consortium believes it can work with DfT and transport operators to introduce new ticket offers to encourage passenger growth. Ticketing needs to be made simpler so that you can, for example, board a bus into Ipswich, travel by train to Leeds, and continue your journey by bus to your ultimate destination. Contactless payment is a way forward. Operators in Nottingham have contactless ticketing with bank or credit cards. The pandemic has accelerated on-bus contactless payment to avoid cash handling. But like many things in life, it is not straightforward. As it has been estimated, I was amazed to read this recently, that still over 20% of people do not have a bank account. And some form of smart ticketing is required for young people, and indeed many people for whom the phone is the principal means of communication. It is important that there is no reduction in public transport investment, so that projects such as East West Rail, with which I'm closely involved, are delivered to make public transport more attractive and the options, be they bus or rail, better connected, including between the different modes. It is also important to enhance cycling and walking opportunities, to better access hubs where bus and train onward connections can be made. Improvements such as at Ely Junction will reduce service delays, and I'm glad that after many years is as a major project now moving forward, albeit slowly. There is of course a concern that reductions in bus networks and frequencies will occur, which will lead to pressures upon local authorities, these are already being seen, to financially support more services in some form or another. Smart thinking is needed to improve information and the appeal of public transport. A non-existent bus service obviously creates difficulties, but so too are services running around half empty. They will not survive. Community transport or other demand responsive services can provide useful feeder links to bus and rail services, as you will hear later in the terms of the Suffolk EV pilot. Despite COVID, or perhaps encouraged by it, decarbonisation will remain at the top of the transport agenda. Work is ongoing to find alternatives to diesel. The modern Euro 6 diesel engine bus has very low emissions, but operators are rightly looking at other alternatives. Fleets of electric buses were introduced 5 years ago onto central London routes, but there does remain concern about the range and recharging arrangements. Some operators are looking at other options. Nottingham has introduced 120 gas-powered buses, and 20 hydrogen fuel cell buses are on order for use in Birmingham. Network Rail has published a traction decarbonisation strategy, which plans for another 12,000 kilometres of electrification by 2050, with hydrogen or battery power on other lines to eliminate diesel traction. This will require over 3,500 electric locomotives and around 200 battery and hydrogen powered trains, with up to 700 freight locomotives. This is an exciting and very necessary initiative. Finally, everyone, democracy in the PTCA at least is at work. The LGA PTC is a member-led body and cross-party, and we can and do deliver a powerful and well-informed grassroots lobby to government and other players such as Network Rail and train operating companies. We have members in this region, and we will always welcome new recruits. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Alexander. That was a really helpful introduction and sets the scene really nicely. So I'm going to invite Andrew Summers to the virtual floor, who's going to do a presentation on rural mobility in the east of England. Andrew, I think you've got a presentation which will be loaded. So while that's happening, Andrew is the Strategic Director for Transport East, and he'll introduce his organisation, which is hugely significant for us, and really welcome him joining us today. As no doubt you'll hear from him, he'll have a fair amount of influence in this area. So Andrew, thank you. You've got your screen up. If you'd like to take us through your presentation, and then you'll open it up for a facilitated discussion after, so we'll all be able to feed in questions and feedback once you're done. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Nick and Councillor Nicol, and great to be here. Thank you very much to East Suffolk for inviting me to this really important session today. So just to introduce myself, I'm Andrew Summers. I'm Strategic Director of Transport East. I'll run through what Transport East is in the first slide or two. But just to sort of summarise what I'm going to be talking about. Firstly, I'll run through the role of Transport East, and then also go through some of the key challenges that have been raised with us as a strategic transport body around rural mobility, not only in this part of the world, but also the rest of England. And then I want to open it out to the floor. So this is really about getting your views as well. We're speaking to government about what we want to change in the east of England, and your views as the key transport users are absolutely fundamental to that. So I'm hoping this is a really interactive session, as well as an informative one. So firstly, I'll quickly introduce what Transport East is. Some of you may be aware, some of you may not be, but you're all members of Transport East. Transport East is the single voice for transport in the east of England. So we cover Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, Southend and Thurrock. We're made up of all 5 transport authorities and all 24 districts, 3 chambers of commerce, 2 local enterprise partnerships, as well as Highways England and Network Rail. And it's important to say that there's clear political buy-in and representation for this. So the lead transport members for each of those 5 transport authorities are fully part and help to set up Transport East, and local members as well as officers play a full role in helping the partnership take forward its key tasks. We're one of 7 subnational transport bodies in England, and we're now recognised by government as one of those 7 bodies that is helping government drive forward economic, environmental and social change through transport across England. So it's worth noting that as well as being a representative of the East of England, we also have a strong network that we can help to influence. So what do we do, and why is it relevant to rural mobility? Well, Transport East is a body that's been set up to have a single voice for transport in the East. And I think as it was being set up in 2018, one of the key factors was the fact that this part of the world didn't really get the funding it deserved from central government, the investment that it needed to make transformational change for residents. And transport was suffering. So the role of Transport East is really to raise the profile of the case for investment in this part of the world, to articulate what exactly it is we can do both to support our national outcomes and local outcomes, and what it is that we need to prioritise. Now, Transport East met the Transport Minister last month, Baroness Beer, and she was very clear about things that she wanted Transport East to do. Firstly, develop an evidence base and a strategy for our part of the world. What is it that we need to do to achieve our long-term transport goals to 2050? And also, what are the investment priorities for government? So what is it that we want government to change? What is it that we want government to invest in? Transport East itself has already set out a series of outcomes it thinks are the most important local things we need to be tackling. I've outlined these on the slide, but these are very much around energised coastal communities. How can we make sure that we really energise the 500 miles of coastline that we have in the east of England? How do we make the most of global gateways? So, for example, we've got some major ports very locally here, Felixstowe, etc. How do we make sure that, particularly post-Brexit, they're playing a full part in the UK's economic recovery and growth going forwards? Multi-centred connectivity. We don't have one big city like London or Manchester or Liverpool. We're made up of 2 smaller cities and 76 smaller towns. How do we make sure that we get that connectivity between those smaller areas to make sure we're really contributing to social and environmental goals? And decarbonisation is a fundamental goal that's being taken forward by government with aspirations for net zero by 2050. How does Transport East play its role in that? How do we as local communities play our role in achieving that national goal? And I think post-COVID, the local and national economic recovery and growth have become even more important. And then finally, the levelling up agenda. This is a sort of a term that's largely been coined by the north of England in terms of levelling up the country. But there's significant amounts of levelling up that we need to be doing as well in our part of the world. And what we're wanting to do is work out what is it that levelling up means for us. And rural mobility and rural connectivity is a huge strategic challenge that plays to many of those outcomes. Now, the role of Transport East is to look at these at a strategic level, to work with government and to work with the other STBs across England to work out, okay, how do we get rural connectivity and some of the solutions on a high profile compared to some of the other infrastructure investment that we want to do. So I'm going to take a quick look at that high level England profile now. I mean, rural mobility really is a strategic challenge when you look at it across the country. In England, 19 million people actually live in rural areas or areas with significant rural. Now, if all of those people actually lived in one single city, it would be over the size of London, over double the size of London. But what we're seeing is that residents in this part of the world certainly don't have that transport offer that big cities do. They generally have poor passenger transport connectivity, investment, and reliance on private car access, and also lower per head government spending compared to some of the bigger cities, despite in some areas paying higher taxes. But what we can see is there's significant potential across England for rural areas to really contribute to that national economy. 24%, so nearly a quarter of all registered businesses in England are actually in rural areas. And the annual turnover of all of those businesses is 424 billion. A lot of them are micro businesses that serve and supply wider supply chains. So there really is a significant economic benefit from continuing to support rural areas. Now, rural connectivity is one of 4 big challenges that national subnational transport body network has taken on this year, and Transport East is taking on the leading role. So I'm really interested to hear what the issues are in your area so that we can start to feed these back to national government. Now, the issues that we've started to work through so far have been very much around the rural nature of this part of the world compared to a lot of the other parts of England. So nearly 40% of our population live in settlements under 10,000 people, so a significant amount of rural population. And we need better connectivity to support a range of factors, economic recovery and jobs, education and carbon emissions. And I'll just run through some details of those. So in terms of economic recovery and jobs, there's 1.7 million jobs in the east of England, creating an annual GVA of 73 billion. And now there's some particular sectors within that are quite unique to us in terms of their specialism around tourism, around renewable energy, around construction. Post-COVID, a significantly challenging situation in terms of continuing to support employment. And we need to make sure that rural connectivity is continuing to play its part in helping people in terms of recovery and jobs, and particularly rural communities where access to jobs and services and social isolation is a particular issue. And then going on to access to education and services. So rural residents, from what we've been told, twice as far from their nearest services as urban residents. So for example, hospitals, 60 minutes by public transport, the average for rural areas, compared to 26 minutes for urban areas. Secondary schools, 7 miles in rural areas compared to 2.8 miles in urban areas. So some significant accessibility issues that we need to be communicating to government in terms of how we then come about our solutions. And then I'll come back to carbon emissions as well. In rural areas, as Alexander's already talked about, decarbonisation is a particular challenge for us. 40% of all carbon emissions in the east of England come from transport, and road transport accounts for a significant majority of that. Around 76% of the trips that take place are by cars and vans, so private vehicles, which is a lot higher than some of those urban conurbations in other parts of England. So this presents a significant decarbonisation challenge for us. How do we support that drive to net zero, considering we have a different transport policy mix compared to other areas? So going into more detailed transport challenges from those wider outcomes, I've just picked up some of the key things that we as regional and subnational SDBs are currently grappling with. So that high reliance on private vehicles in rural areas, how do we help to address that going forwards? Significant amount of people don't actually have access to a car. So how do we support those people who are potentially isolated? Higher transport costs as well. So residents in rural areas are experiencing significantly higher weekly transport costs, £58 higher a week than urban areas, which puts them at a disadvantage in terms of economic viability of accessing jobs, etc. As Councillor Nicol talked about earlier, passenger transport viability is particularly difficult at the minute, and post-COVID, the situation has exacerbated. I think the Council for Protection of Rural England outlined that since 2009, around 3,000 bus services across England have been lost, and potentially even more through COVID. So a really challenging sort of situation in terms of passenger transport viability. And what we want to try and understand is how do we work with government to try to improve that? And that brings in the concept of transport deserts. So again, the Campaign for Rural England did a bit of research to identify that over half of towns in many regions are actually categorised as transport deserts, i.e. no other form of transport to access services other than the private car. And this is a significant issue at a national level that we need to start to overcome. And then poorer digital broadband connectivity. So another way of accessing services is around digital connectivity, but if that is not rolled out in rural areas, then very difficult for those residents to be able to access services. So I'll just start to wrap up now in terms of where we might be going with strategic solutions. Now, what I'm really interested to know is what you think the solutions are that we can start to communicate to government, and the next slide will start to open that discussion. A piece of work that our colleagues in the West Midlands have done has been very much around what are what is that toolkit that we could start to use at a strategic level and communicate to government? And they've identified three broad areas that you could start to work in. One is around taking people to places. So continuing to work out how people can access those vital jobs and services, potentially through public and community transport. And we want to work with government and the PCT, etc., to work out how we do that. There's also around how you take goods and services to people. So the concept of rural hubs, etc., comes in there. And then also about potentially replacing transport with digital communications, which won't be appropriate in all instances, but for things such as home working, how can you actually reduce the reliance on transport and allow people to work at home instead, which we've seen a lot of through the COVID situation. I think this is a place-based approach. All rural areas are very different. There's not one size fits all. And as a regional body, we're very, very aware of that. And we're not looking to prescribe anything, but we're really looking to understand what those issues are that we could help you with at a national level in terms of influencing government. So I'm going to start to wrap up there. Basically, our partnership, which comprises the local authorities and businesses, chambers of commerce across the east of England, is now starting work on our transport strategy to 2050. And as I said earlier, one of the key things we're going to be doing is identifying strategic investment priorities for the east of England. A key element of that is understanding rural connectivity, particularly for our part of the world, particularly for the east of England, where rural connectivity is one of our major transport challenges. So what I'd like to do is open this up to a bit of an interactive session, which will hopefully frame the nature of the debate going forward. I'd like to start by asking you, either by raising your hand or by writing in the chat box, to think about some of these strategic questions. And what we're really interested to know is, what are the rural transport challenges in your area? So what are the things that are really taxing you at the minute? And I think secondly, what needs to change at a national level to support rural transport? Some of the discussions later on are going to focus on some of those local solutions. And what we really need to complement that is, what do we need to be asking government for at that national level to really change the way in which transport is provided and rural mobility is able to be accessed by all. So that wraps up my slides. What I'll do, I'll leave those questions up there, And I'd like to welcome anyone either in the chat box or either by raising their hand to offer some suggestions. And I'll go through as many as I can in the 10 minutes that we have available. So starting to get some hands up now, I'll start to go to them. So I've got firstly Rachel Smith-Light. Rachel, I'll hand over to you for the question or comment.
Thank you, Andrew. That was fascinating. Very quickly, and I'm sorry if you said this already and I missed it, but did you say that this would be shared, this presentation, somewhere? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And the other thing I really wanted to say was we're trying to kind of in my ward, well, not just in my ward, in this area, there's, you know, some of us are trying to think, how can we encourage more cycling? I know that our councillors, East Suffolk, more cycling, walking, and make those conditions more favourable. I'm a cyclist myself and a walker, you know, I guess who isn't a pedestrian at some point, but I don't have a car, so it's like more of an issue for me. And I'm fine with that, and I manage okay. I manage it quite well with, you know, I have a fold-up bike, I can put it on the train and stuff as well, which helps. But the thing that it seems to me is, you know, it's all very well people being able to cycle feeling reasonably safe in our towns and even villages, but the minute you want to get into town or into village or anywhere else for that matter, you've got a problem on our rural roads, because the national speed limits apply, and that's usually 60 miles an hour, as you know. That is crazily fast for our small country lanes. It really is, and it's particularly a problem if you are a cyclist or a horse rider for that matter, or somebody trying to cross the road on foot. And I cannot see, and unless and until we separate the areas for cyclists, you know, by sort of dedicated spaces, lanes, whatever, which may not be feasible on the smaller roads. But, you know, in that case, if we're not going to, I don't see how we're going to make it more conducive if we don't sort the traffic speeds out, not least. The other thing is, we really need, I feel, and I know there's, well, I say I know, there's talk, I believe, at county level, which is to have the portfolio holders for transport, obviously. There's talk around having an electric bus trial between Wickham Market Station, which is actually in Campsie Ash, and Framlingham, and presumably that would go via Wickham Market Village. It would make no sense if it didn't. But I also would like to see, and I'm just putting it out there generally today, that service, and again, I know it's a trial, but I think the trial really does need to extend between Rendlesham and Wickham Market Station, train station, because Rendlesham has, you know, a sizable population. It's sort of like a large village / small town with about 3,500 residents who currently cannot get anywhere unless they have a car, because they only have 2 bus services a day that don't go anywhere near that station anyway. So to me, it would seem like a massive missed opportunity if that weren't at least looked into. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Some great points there. On the cycling one, probably a plug for the session this afternoon around active travel, where we'll delve into that in a bit more detail. On the electric bus one, yes, noted that as well. So thanks. I've got a few more speakers to come in. Councillor Bevan, I've got you next on the list. Over to you.
Yeah, things are going to change with ways people are working. We're expecting a lot of people who have second home here to maybe work here a lot of the time. But one of the problems is if you go by bus or train to London, by the time you get the first bus and train there at 11:30, you've missed the last train home. So what we need is a real investment in local transport. And I'm afraid that it doesn't work out economically unless we get some support from the government. And I'm disappointed that concessionary fares are not being applied to some of our innovative schemes.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for the point around the investment from government, which is something that we need to understand what it is we're asking for. I've got some other speakers as well, so Graham Newman, can I hand over to you, please?
Yes, Andrew, thank you very much. 2 questions, really. Do we have the matter of whether our community transport operators can do work like, for instance, Felixstowe to Ipswich Hospital, which is covered by public transport, covered by a commercial service run by First, but actually quite a few people can't actually get on a traditional public transport vehicle. So that's one issue. The other is, do you ever foresee there'll be any changes to the 1989 Bus Act, which seem to be to compromise anything like local authorities want to do, where it involves a commercial journey taking place over the same length of road?
Okay, so on your second point, I can't speak for DFT, but I do know that they are working on a bus strategy at the minute, which I think is going to be sort of ready over the next few months. So let's keep in touch with them on that one. Also noted your first point as well, which is key, and we'll add that to the sort of the list of issues that we need to be including in this. I'm conscious we've got a few other speakers as well before we hand over to the next slot. Nick Cork, we've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Just very quickly, obviously, one of the big things we've got in this area is the age demographic, and the over 65s, what increasing by, I think it is a ridiculous amount in the next 20 years. So we've got to bear that in mind. But I actually see what's happening at the moment, the COVID situation. We can either look at it as a problem or we can look at it as an opportunity. And I would like to think that this is a perfect opportunity for us to give it a really good shake-up. And, you know, if communities start working together, we can make these things happen.
Thanks, John. Yeah, there is that concept of disruptor events, isn't there? Creating transformational change that wouldn't happen otherwise. So, a really good point there. Thinking about the positives here as well. But a few other speakers to come in. Peter Byatt, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew. I'll be very brief, and I have to admit lack of knowledge on Travel East and the organisation itself. And I appreciate that Transport for London is one organisation, but when are we going to look at truly integrating the idea of having a travel card which you can use on any public transport, whether it be private or government owned in any way, so that we can then, you know, stop worrying about, you know, being able to jump on a bus, jump on a train. Rachel talking about, you know, wheel your bike into the station and actually work towards something quite major and quite drastic.
Thanks, yeah. No, that is a really good point. I used to work for Transport for London, and the government up to do that. And actually, for the user, therefore, it makes it a lot easier. It gives you more confidence and breaks down your barriers to using public transport, knowing that you don't really have to think about it. It is an issue that the national SDB network are talking about. Some have developed thinking quite fast, for example, Transport for the North. So it's definitely something that I agree with you needs to be looked at in terms of a solution for customers, and we'll add that to the list of issues definitely that's coming through this. Conscious we've got a few more speakers. John Cross, I've got you with your hand up. I'll hand over to you.
Oh, hello. I'm in Great Glenman, which doesn't have any public transport at all. Two quick points. One, Rachel, couldn't agree more. Can we link that with quiet lanes? Because that's an initiative that we're investigating at the moment, particularly with taking advantage of e-bikes, which extends the range for people to get into, in our case, probably Framlingham or Wickham Market. And secondly, if I go into Fram on a Saturday morning, I will see 4 or 5 people from the village. What can we do about car sharing? I think we need some impetus centrally to small communities to make that work, possibly using technology and publicity.
Yeah. Thank you very much, John. Yeah, again, sort of point you towards the session this afternoon on active travel, but yeah, certainly my experience in other places, quiet ways are an effective way to break down those barriers to people using active travel. So we'll definitely sort of be looking into sort of the wider active travel policy as part of this work. Okay, I'm looking for any other hands up. Can't see any. I think everyone's had an opportunity to have a chat. Thank you very much to those that have contributed. Very useful, and we'll be using that as we go forward, and great to have that early discussion as part of this debate. Having a quick look at the chat as well. There's a bit of a discussion in there around High Speed 2 and around can Transport East look into some of the issues around that. So we'll add that to the list. But thank you very much. A very, very useful feedback from all of you. Nick, I'll hand back to you as the host to move on to the next speaker. But thanks, Nick, and thanks all for your contributions.
Thanks, Andrew, so much for that. Really helpful, and thanks everyone for all your comments and questions. We are noting these down for future use, obviously. Right, so we better move on swiftly to the next part of this morning's session, which is to hear from our colleagues and speakers from Suffolk County Council. We're going to hear from Kirsty Marjoram and Susan Davey, who are going to talk about connecting our rural communities. So if we can have that presentation uploaded, and I'm sure my colleagues will do their best to get us back on track with time, and then we'll do the same thing and open it up for a discussion and questions. So welcome aboard. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Can you all see that slide there? Yeah. So my name's Susan Davey, Rural Transport Manager, and just thought it'd be useful to give you some background on my role. So I oversee the contracts for the delivery of rural connecting community transport services. And that involves also working in partnership with charities, clinical commissioning groups, community transport operators, county and local council teams, district parish councillors, MPs and rural taxi operators and stakeholders. On a national level, it's important that Suffolk has that contribution. So I have represented Suffolk on the Department for Transport's local authority working group on the issue of community transport permit guidance. And I'm also a board member on the National Association of Transport Coordinating Officers. That's really helpful in terms of getting a feel for what's happening nationally and sharing best practice. So I thought it'd be good today to give you some background on how we have done our continuous development of rural transport services. And this actually goes back to 2014, where we engaged with stakeholders and their feedback suggested that communities needed to take a lead in identifying local transport needs and devising their own solutions. And where there exists, town and parish council should be the main drivers for this, working with other voluntary and community groups where appropriate. And elsewhere, the council should encourage and support existing or new community groups to work together. And this should really incorporate the principles of co-design, innovation, and so one of the key points really there as well was that community transport operators need to assess and redesign services to ensure that young people trying to get to education, training and employment could book regular journeys. So moving on from there, we had a large sort of conference with some workshops, and it became evident that the services were very confusing to people. There was lots on offer, and people didn't understand what was available for them, and young people particularly didn't see it as a service for them. The services had different names. There was dial a ride, and all those white areas there we all see had no coverage. And community cars as well, again with those areas with no coverage. And we supported the more innovative Suffolk Links services, but they weren't in all areas. So we were in a position of supporting over 50 different services with numerous phone numbers and different operators. So we recognised there was a real opportunity there to break down that confusion that people had about what was available for them in their area. So we came together to design single contracts for each of the geographical areas, a complete package for the customer, and more efficient use of vehicles and services designed at local levels. So we went out for tender and we asked the operators what could they provide in their area with their local knowledge in each of the districts. So the services were rebranded as Connecting Communities and they were launched in 2016. And simplified, you can see there's one contact number for each area, and they were improved in that the booking hours were extended and the operating hours were also much improved, being available from 7 till 7, Monday to Saturday. So there's a real sort of push there to make the services known to younger people, more attractive in the marketing design, and with the central opportunity to make bookings online as well, and that's been quite popular in the coastal area. So here's some sort of feel for some data. There's rafts of data I could have provided you today, but in this simple terms, really, the number of journeys there have been each year since the contract started, passenger journeys overall county-wide, and in the east as well. You'll see a fairly low subsidy reflected there in Waveney, but this sort of demonstrates the different approach to the services, in that Waveney do a high level of community charges to support their local community, where in other areas there are services operating on different sorts of permits. Yeah, so you'll be able to look at that later in more detail as this is recorded. So continuing with our improvements, last year we went out to the public and invited them to come in and talk to us to have a rural transport conversation. We had events in Beccles and Bury and Kesgrave, and really got some mixed feedback. So part of the objectives of those conversations was to help inform our strategic direction for rural transport, to focus on how we could do things differently, to explore the change that's happening in the world of travel with new opportunities, to try and sort of get it across really that it's not all about the scheduled bus, and to look at the outcomes for people seeking to improve lives and new ideas. We did some workshop activities, trying to sort of focus around, do you need to travel, or could goods and services come to you? What works well now? What could be done differently? And how do you communicate what travel services you need, what works well, what could be done differently, what might need to happen to enable these things to work? So the key themes that we captured from those engagement events, that people want to get out, they don't want services coming to them, being able to get out, want to reduce rural isolation. They want transport, want to know what's out there. People not always aware of what's already on their doorstep. That's a real challenge for us. People want to know about all the options available to them. They want flexibility and choice. People want to get to larger supermarkets, leisure centres and cinemas. And people like the extra care that some transport operators provide. And they're willing to pay extra for this service. And it was quite interesting to also note that people are willing to share transport and share taxis. So very timely, earlier in the year, the Department for Transport announced some funding termed Rural Mobility Fund, but it came with a number of caveats on how applications needed to be formed. The funding awards were limited to 0.5 to 1.5 million, depending on the project. They're available to trial demand responsive transport solutions where they do not already exist. Consideration would be given to existing schemes looking to expand networks, but Either solution must evidence how the DRT services provided will enhance opportunities for rural communities to access education, employment, healthcare, and other services in urban areas, enabling greater social inclusion. And it was interesting that the point there really is that the solution should also demonstrate diversity of passenger groups, making it distinct from dial-a-ride and community transport services. Therein laid a challenge, and the DRT vehicles needed to be wheelchair accessible. The solution needs to demonstrate an expansion of an area offer with evenings and weekend services covered by existing services, and there should be pooling of existing resources to provide better services to local residents, reducing duplication of efforts or the costs providing the local transport offer. And the DRT solution should include the development and enhancement of technology, digital platforms, scheduling software, booking apps. So we researched how different types of Suffolk passenger transport solutions can connect. We really aspire to ensure that we can develop a real network of connections. And I note the point earlier about travel cards and how we can ensure that people have an offer to, from the community cars right through to connecting with buses and taxis and rail. So we identified an opportunity for Suffolk private hire vehicle taxi operators to provide taxi bus services, shared taxis essentially, creating more connection opportunities, connecting communities, local bus and rail services, bringing those mix of resources together. So we engaged with taxi operators who are willing to register scheduled taxi bus services and or commit to taxi sharing services, and they needed to commit that they would trial with us a dedicated booking app where passengers can see where and when taxis are available. And in June this year, we submitted 3 rural mobility funds to support taxi bus pilots in the east, the mid area and west of the county. And whilst we remain confident about the outcome of these bids, it's still not been confirmed by the DFT because they're currently quite understandably pulled aside on COVID-19 issues. So not wanting to delay, we started to progress an innovative project in the east of the county. We went out through social media on Twitter and Facebook with a number of brands and designs, and Catch came back, you'll see there, as the most popular. It can have a dedicated, or will have a dedicated domain of catchlift.com, and we'll be trialling this on a route between Framlingham and Wickham Market and Campsie Ash, utilising 2 electric vehicles. So the wheelchair accessible vehicles operating as shared taxis, registered as taxi buses, a piece of legislation that I could go into great detail with, but I won't do today. You can come back to me and ask more on that if you would like to. So passengers will be charged in line with local bus fares, and the service will be bookable via an app, but also importantly, note that it will be a dedicated telephone line as well. As their private hire taxi license combined with an operator's license, we will want people to pre-book, and it won't be sort of a hail and ride or stand at a bus stop and get on. This is a new trial of a different sort of service, and it will be available 7 days a week from 6:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night, Monday to Saturday, and 9 a.m. till 7 on Sundays. The pilot area, based some work that Framlingham Town Council had already identified some demand, and our partner taxi operator has agreed to operate a fixed single taxi fare between Framlingham, Wicker Market, Campsie Ash at £15 single and £30 return. So just to explain the concept in terms of subsidy, a passenger will pay a single fare of £4 and £7 return. The vehicles will have 8 seats without social distancing, a capacity of 4 passengers per vehicle without social distancing. The required return subsidy, for example, will be £2. Thereafter, the subsidy is £0. And the real objective of this pilot is to build confidence amongst rural communities about the concept of taxi sharing. So we do recognise that initially it may require higher fare subsidies whilst the service builds. Service users will be assured of journey times because the vehicle will only serve fixed stopping points. Passengers requesting journeys via the dedicated booking app will see where the taxi bus is and how long it will take to arrive. Obviously, those that make telephone bookings will also be assured of how long the vehicle will take to arrive, but the app will provide the visual. And fares will be able to be paid on the app or contactless card to the driver or cash payments. So the proposed route really in through Framlingham, go through the great detail there. You can pick up on that a later time for those who are not familiar with all those stops in Framlingham and Wicker Market. But essentially, a route will go through to connect with the rail station based at Campsie Ash. And the taxi buses will operate out or return throughout this route on demand. So we won't have a service that's going back and forth potentially empty. Currently, we have a proposed soft launch testing of mid-December and realistic start live launch of mid-January. This is a bit of a moving issue regarding COVID, but we're working on target with that. So the council really aspires to develop and support a network of rural taxi bus services, and the development of these will improve rural transport connections, as previously said, to connected community services, bus services, and rail services. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague Kirsty Marjoram to explain more about the work that we do within the passenger transport unit. Hello to Kirsty.
Hi, thanks, Susan. So my name's Kirsty Marjoram, and I am the operations manager in the passenger transport team. My main responsibility is for the procurement of home to school and local bus services, and along with any operational day-to-day issues of these services as they arrive. So just moving on to the next slide. If that's okay, Susan. So focusing on the bus network, I think it's worth noting there are about 205 registered bus services in Suffolk. Of these bus services, 160 of them are fully commercial. So this means that these commercial services have no involvement from us at Suffolk County Council in terms of financial support. There are, however, some that we do support from a local bus budget, and this budget is just currently under £1 million to support the entire county with the local bus services. Park and Ride, as listed on that slide, is a commercial bus service, but we do support the cost for the Park and Ride sites that they operate from. So we work very closely with the operator first on this service. So moving on to the next 4 slides, we've broken down the county into 4 maps, and these maps of the county show high frequency bus routes. I'm not sure if we're able to just sort of move through to those. Might take a bit of time because Susan's in control.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Okay. So that's the last of the network bus maps.
Yeah. So just move. Yeah. So we've broken them down into 4. So there was all these maps are available on our website, suffolkonboard.com, if anyone wants to go and have a look at them in detail. But the 4 slides, they show that the high frequency bus routes across Suffolk for both commercial and the local bus services. The intention of these maps is to provide a broad overview to the public of what transport is available. And these maps, along with the journey planner that can give you more detailed information on routes and timetables, as I said, can be found on our website, Suffolk on Board. But on this last slide, you will see the Catch Pilot route in green there, and you'll see that this is a connecting service that will link into the train station for onward travel. So if we just move on to the concluding slide, and this was sort of represented earlier, this slide represents the different transport options that are available and our vision to work with both commercial and third sector operators within Suffolk to provide rural transport solutions and having differing options available for multimodal journeys. So that just gives you an overview of the different options that are available. So that does bring us to the end of the presentation and the opportunity now for some feedback. We have 3 questions that we'd like to get your feedback on with regard to the Catch Pilot in particular. And I will just say what the 3 are, and then we can put hands up, and then we can, Susan can, and I can answer any questions that you raise. So the 3 questions that we have listed that we'd like your feedback on are: what is your view about the concept of shared taxis? What is your view about the services being available on Sundays? And what is your view about young people using this service? Do you think this type of service will appeal to that age bracket? Thank you. So I think we've got some hands up there. So do you want to see?
Could I bring in some of the questions, please? As we've lost Nick. Hello, Nick, can you hear me? Hello.
Hi, Susan. Can you see
Hello.
Hi there. You just broke up a little bit at the end. Can you see the hands being raised, or would you prefer me to bring people in?
Yes, I'd be pleased if you
fine.
could facilitate this session, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem at all. Okay, so apologies if I've not got the order exactly right, but I can see Rachel Smith-Light raised a hand. If you want to make your point, Rachel.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, thanks, guys. That was fascinating. I assume this will be made available because that was a real whistle-stop tour, and I'm not sure I got all of it. Brilliant. But very quickly, I got slightly confused. I love it, by the way, the catch thing. And as I've said earlier before your presentation, it would be great if this works out to see it rolled out to Rendlesham. So going east rather than west from the station would be phenomenal for those residents. I got confused. You said something about it cost £15 or £30 return, and then later on you said £4 single or £7 return. So I'm not quite sure which it is.
Okay.
The other thing, from what I could gather, there's going to be a mid-December soft launch. Have I got that right? And I didn't see the rest of the slide to know when it will become perhaps, more rolled out, if that's the right expression. And then I wanted to know, so it's bookable only, I think, is that right? You can't just turn up at the station and get on one of them. And then the other, do you want me to answer the 3 questions? Do you want me to just quickly, your 3 questions, I mean, as well now, or not?
I'm happy to just quickly answer yours
in
regards to fares. So in terms of subsidy,
Susan, I think you're just breaking up.
£30.
If you could just repeat what you've just said, please, on subsidy.
Yeah. So we have agreed a fixed fare maximum that the taxi operator can be paid. So the customer will pay a bus fare, and we meet the shortfall essentially to the taxi operator. So yes, the customer will pay £7 return. We just meet the shortfall to the taxi operator. the launch, we will be doing trials to test the app and the range of the electric vehicles during December, with aspiration to do a proper live launch in January, subject to any COVID restrictions. I think that answered your questions.
Yeah, and just my suggestion about it being extended to Rendlesham, but I'll leave that one in your suggestion box. I'll answer very quickly my opinion on what you've asked us. I think it should be there should be a Sunday service. I suppose I would say that, but I think it doesn't have to be as frequent, but I definitely think it needs to be there. As regards young people, will it appeal to them? Yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't. In fact, we were talking yesterday at a meeting about young people and their sort of general stuckness, because of course many of them, they're either not old enough to drive, or they just don't, or they can't afford to learn, let alone buy a car or insure it. And actually it's not really the way forward. It's not very eco-friendly anyway. So I was talking about the possibility of shared pool electric bikes, but then we are back to the thing I said earlier about the dangerous rural roads, etc. So that's not going to be an option for everybody anyway. But I think this could absolutely help hugely with their mobility problems, because there's a sort of a mistake I think people make generally, that all young people love tech and they're all completely happy with Zooming and apping and social media things forever more with all their friends, and that's just not true. They're people that need to see people in three-dimensional ways, the same as the rest of us. So this could be brilliant for linking them with their friends. So thank you. It's been really interesting, and I can't wait to see it in action. Thank you.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. If I can bring in Nick Cork, I think I saw next, if that's a new hand, Nick.
Hi, Nick. No, actually, to be fair, I hadn't got my hand up, but I'd very quickly say, bearing in mind that thanks to Sue, who advised us of a grant that was available, we've actually got an electric vehicle, and we got a Nissan, and we use that for our hospital transport. But I would say we got slightly caught out. We didn't get caught out. We got away with it. But we had to take someone to Addenbrooke's in it the other day, and the appointment, it allowed the vehicle to be charged at Addenbrooke's, and all of a sudden the appointment was only supposed to be 2 hours, became 45 minutes, so we didn't actually have a full time to charge it. We just got back. So there is vaguely issues with this charging. We've got to make sure we have enough points for these vehicles, but it does work. So, and thanks to Sue for helping us with that particular grant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. John Jones.
Thanks, Nick. Good morning, everyone. And thanks to the two presenters. It was really interesting information. A couple of questions, please, for Sue. To understand of £4 and £7, is that the same regardless of where you get on? So if you're halfway down the journey, is that still £4 and £7 to the railway station? Secondly, if I may, the question of whether it needs to be pre-booked or not, I think the earlier questioner asked the same question, but there was no answer, I don't think. Does that mean that if a person arrives at the railway station without a booking, they cannot join a vehicle that may be empty? And then thirdly, could you tell me what facilities are going to be provided with regard to recharging the vehicles and where they will be?
Okay. The question regarding the fare at any stop is a really good one, and something that I will take back.
Susan, you might have broken up there again. So if you just wind back 10 seconds and repeat what you've just said, please.
Okay. So the fare is a good question, and I'll take that back, because currently that is based on anywhere en route. This service will have to be pre-booked because it's a taxi licensing regime that we're working under, and it's a trial, so it's a different sort of service. But we don't see a real issue with that, because if you do come in at the station, you can book on the app and pretty much access the vehicle fairly swiftly, or just pick up your mobile phone and book it, and it should be not too far away at any point. We are installing regarding charge
Sorry, Susan, you've broken up. You're just mentioning charging points. If you can just repeat your point, please.
We are progressing having charging points installed at Campsie Ash in the car park at the rail station for the electric vehicles.
Okay, so on the second point of not having to pre-book. So if a person of a certain age who hasn't got a mobile phone arrives at the station, they can't join. They can't join.
They can telephone to book, or they could make an advance booking by telephone for the timing that they require, as they would with connecting community services. They also have to be pre-booked.
But so you have to be carrying a mobile phone.
No, you could telephone before you leave home.
No, so I don't think you're getting the point. Someone travels from Ipswich to Campsie Ash to go on to Framlingham, and they don't have a mobile phone. So therefore they cannot make a phone booking and they cannot go via the app. So are they then left at the station?
Well, they would be now, wouldn't they, essentially?
Well, that's not the point. This is a new trial service. Would the trial service be left at the station?
Yeah.
They would.
Well, we have to work within legislation, and we can't break those rules. So this is a trial, and they can book in advance before they leave home to plan their journey. I would be surprised if somebody, an elderly person, would venture out without a journey planned in advance. But that's a valid point that we'll take into consideration. But I think we've looked at all the options available. If they're very
You've just broken up again. Last 5 seconds.
Okay. So we do continue to support the connecting community services for older people who might have concerns about onward journeys.
Okay, thanks, John. Those points have been noted, as Susan has said. Can I move it on to Graham Newman, please?
Yes, I think I haven't really got an answer to the actual 3 questions you've asked me to answer, Sue, but I mean, I think there's 2 things about this which really are sort of override the whole thing. That is publicity. And it just, it's so okay for us aficionados who are tuned into this meeting at the moment, who really want to see public transport do well and get more use. But so much of this stuff does pass over people so easily. We just got to keep on getting that message out. We need people like councillors to be putting it on their own Facebook pages. And we need to be able to demonstrate that it really is durable and reliable. And then I think as far as young people is concerned, again, there are some young people who are used to using public transport and actually become quite conversant with how you use that, and they will be fans of this. However, the people that we really need to address this to is those we need to change. I've got an 18-year-old in the house here. I want to get to Ipswich. If there was a 75 bus at the end of the road, and oh no, I need to get there for half an hour's time, and of course, as a weak parent, I jump in the car and take her there. That's the kind of people we've somehow got to change that culture, which I think is going to be really difficult. And going in with that is what happens when you come home. If let's say we get to Wickham Market, you go off to Ipswich or indeed London, you're on the way back and a connection gets missed for whatever reason. Is then your entire travel plan completely shanghaied, and you find yourself at Campsie Ash Station for a very long time trying to find the taxi that will take you back to Framlingham. I mean, I know during opening hours, Ros is there with a lovely cup of coffee, but it's what happens outside those hours after 6 o'clock when she shuts down. I mean, it's a serious point. I'm making a joke out of it, but it's a serious point. If people don't perceive durability, when things go wrong, then I think they won't flock to this. They are my concerns.
So can I just reassure that this pilot, this trial, will have the support of additional vehicles provided by the taxi operator to ensure that there's always that sufficient vehicle resource to meet demand. So we wouldn't want to have that situation where somebody was left there and there wasn't any sufficient vehicles available.
Thanks, Susan. And just as chair privilege, really, in terms of publicity, obviously this is a project which the local community partnership and potentially the board is going to support. So we have got that, hopefully, grassroots level support for this, and there's nothing like the community wrapping around a pilot project to support it in their locality, and something that Andrew Summers, that you heard from earlier, is particularly keen on. Things which succeed have got support locally. So we really need to all, contribute to this to make it work, to make it as resilient as possible. And just one other quick question while I'm talking: is there any provision for cycle racks on the back of these vehicles, so people with bikes can, hop on and off and then take their onward journeys after that? Just a point which you might want to come back on later. But I'll bring Alexander Nicol in next.
Thanks, Nick. I mean, just a rather obvious point. I mean, the scale and range of the questions here actually underline why it's important that we carry out a pilot, and why we don't just sort of kind of throw this around randomly and hope that it sticks. I mean, it is worth noting, and I might be biased here, that Susan and her team have developed this with support from members in an era of COVID and in an era of unprecedented demand on the financial resources of all tiers of local government, and stress for everybody, with no immediate or certain end in sight. But one thing we are certain of is that we will be trialling the Catch electric vehicle, and I think it's worth pausing on that point. We're trying to deal not just with issues of facilitating transport and movement for all ages, dealing with the community partnerships high priorities of enhanced transport, particularly for rural areas, dealing with issues of rural isolation, particularly for the elderly, but also lack of access for the young, and also this schism which has come up in the questions between how most of us just reach for a mobile phone to do a lot more than make mobile phone calls, pay bills and do all sorts of other things. Most of the things on my mobile phone, I don't know how they work, but I certainly have one to make a phone call. There's still a public payphone at Campsie Ash. It hasn't been vandalised when I last looked, and the team at the station house would be happy to lend you a phone if you needed it. But I think that the serious point here is to not be too Eeyorish. This is a pilot. It's been well thought through. The council has already put out a lot of money willingly to lease the 2 electric vehicle buses. Electric vehicle charging points will go in at the station at Campsie Ash, and an equivalent in Framlingham. We want a service which is not going to be giving anybody any surprises. And yes, 2 points about whether it should serve Rendlesham and other places. And, unlike Rachel Smith-Light, I have a vested interest in it serving Rendlesham, because I'm the divisional member for Rendlesham. And I've already given an undertaking to the Rendlesham Parish Council that as far as I can see it, if the pilot is successful in all the ways that your questions mean that it must be, that resource permitting, we will try and extend the service in East Suffolk, and Rendlesham is an obvious place that it might be extended to, and also facilitates equivalent services in other parts of the county. So I would like to close by actually thanking Susan and Kirsty and the team, a hard-pressed team in the county's passenger transport team, for continuing to develop this innovative pilot, which we will roll out and which we will assess, and if successful, we will develop to go to other communities within the county at large. So thanks, Susan. I know you have some IT difficulties in making the presentation, but I think you've done a great job this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alexander. Well said. And can I bring back in Rachel, please? Did you have another point to make, Rachel, or was that an old?
Yes, thank you, Nick. I'm loving your idea about cycle racks. I wish I thought of it first, because that would be amazing for a lot of keen cyclists who would love that idea. I would, but lots of people want to tour the area, especially with better weather. My question, and I'm sorry if this sounds patronising, I really hope it doesn't, because I'm sure you totally thought of this, but will it dovetail with the train times coming in and obviously leaving? I assume it will. Thank you.
Well, it will operate on demand, and it will need to maximise the seating. Hopefully, more people who use it, the more successful it will be. Some people like to get places early, and not at the exact time that the train leaves. So I think it will be interesting to assess how people prefer to travel, really. On cycle racks, it's a bit of a challenge in that anything that we do put on the rear of the vehicle would restrict the wheelchair access. We have trialled a service in previous times, but found that there wasn't a lot of take up, and that was in the coastal area for Darsham to access Minsmere and Dunwich, and quite surprising that people didn't pick up on it.
Okay, thank you.
I think, sorry, just to quick reply to that, I think a lot of the time these things are not very well advertised, and that's not any criticism at all. But I think sometimes people just don't know that. It's like when you see, like when I see like the Dial-A-Ride service, I've never really fully understood it or known what it is for. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's why we tried to rebrand it, to keep trying on that one. But we'll look into cycle racks. I think that there is definitely something there. Thank you.
Brilliant, that's really helpful. We are coming to the close of this session, unfortunately. I'm sure we could talk for much longer, but I do want to just bring in Carol Poulter, who's got her hand up, and she is the local chair of the community partnership at Framlingham and that area. So Carol, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to echo what Alexander said and thank Sue and her team for responding directly to what's been a local need. When bus services are diminishing, it's something that we all know is a problem in rural communities. And I think this is an example of local the county council and Sue and her team and Alexander in particular working together with us in Framlingham and Wickham Market and doing this pilot. And it is a pilot, so we will learn from the experience and look forward to having the feedback early next year. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much. I'm going to have to bring this to an end at 11 on the dot. So we've met the objective of the timing. Just to say that we do have an afternoon session, and hopefully many of you will be joining us for that, where we're going to be talking about active travel, and I'm sure the discussion and the presentations will be equally as good. That leaves me to thank all our presenters, Alexander Nichol, Andrew Summers, Kirsty and Susan, who just presented, and of course Luke and Jane Cole for organising, and the East of England Local Government Association. These things are difficult to pull together. It has worked pretty well, I hope you all agree. And thank you for all your contributions and for joining us this morning. They were really valid contributions. They have been noted. We will feed these into our community partnership discussions and elsewhere. We do have a specific group looking at transport, so rest assured we will be considering this and perhaps coming back to you because this is so important. Alexander, I think you're waving at me. Do you want to come back in? You're on mute.
No, I wasn't. I was just looking at the chat bar.
Ah, okay, no problem. Right, so thank you all for joining, and hopefully see you this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
It's really good, really interesting. Thank you very much for all your hard work.
Yeah, excellent presentations, and thank you very much. Very interesting.